This is our keynote speaker, and I've got the wrong paper up. And this is Dr. Anna Marie Prentiss. She received her PhD from the Department of Archaeology at Simon Fraser University in 1993. She has been employed at the University of Montana since, since, I've lost my place. Since 1995, is it, Anna? I lost my place, yeah. Her research has been enhanced in collaborative partnerships with indigenous groups in the North American Pacific Northwest, Plains, Rockies, and Arctic regions. She has worked with Western?
Housepit.
Housepit. Oh, no, it's not a type. Housepit, all right. Housepit, the Bridge River Indian Band since 2003, focusing on the I thought there were typos in there.
It's just Salish.
All right. I'm going to just turn this over to you, Anna.
Perfect. Let me get the PowerPoint up here. Okay. Everybody
Please
see
don't
that?
forget to share with the Zoom participants.
Oh, you know what? I want to also put this on record. Let's run to that.
Oh, we can
No,
Because
let's
yesterday
just
they
go.
couldn't see.
I've got the recording going.
Can
over
everybody
here.
see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Can the Zoom audience see it?
They do. No, it needs to be shared.
Have you shared the screen?
Oh.
Screen
Yeah, share.
And reclaim host.
Down below. Can you see it now?
They definitely
Can you guys see it?
They can see now your whole screen, but if you can. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So we can start?
do. There's something that's reclaim host.
Yeah, reclaim host.
Stay co-host or reclaim host?
Reclaim.
Reclaim host. I think we've almost got it going. Can they see you? Can they see the screen?
Can you guys see the screen?
Why can't
Yeah, you can see it.
we? Okay. Let's do it. Let's get to it.
Okay, good. All right,
Lag time.
all right. First of all, hi everyone.
Nobody showing.
Thank you, Professor Gray Morning, for organizing this great event. I think this is a wonderful chance to share a lot of different research, a lot of different perspectives. As Neoka noted, I've been a professor here since 1995. My field work is probably 90% involved with working with indigenous communities. I made a career out of trying to build projects that are empowering to indigenous partners. And so for the last 23 years, we have worked with Xwísten, which is one of 11 bands from the Statlia Nation in interior British Columbia. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So let's go. Okay. So what I want to do is talk about who the Statliam are, a little bit about their history, about a little bit how our project got started. Then I'm going to spend some time on archaeology, looking at results of our research, which were driven largely by questions they asked, wanted us to sort of come up with answers to. I'll talk a bit about that, and then I'll talk about some of the practical outcomes of the work in reference to the community of Xwísten. All right. So, Statliam people. These are the salmon people, as they like to refer to themselves. They live in pit house villages, winter pit house villages, sedentary in the winter season, relatively mobile in the warm season. Here's this is a close-up of the sort of the big S curve in the Fraser River. This is the best salmon fishery in interior British Columbia, all of BC. It is a hot spot for salmon, and there's no reason or no wonder that there are so many archaeological sites. The stars are major villages, the little dots are smaller hamlets. And these are a couple of the major sites. This is Keeley Creek, which is located here, and this is Bridge River, or Kachoknaz, which is located over there near the town of Lillooet. During July and August when the sockeye are running, it's a very busy time for the Statlium and Xwísten folks. They dip net sockeye, they set net spring salmon or king salmon or Chinook salmon, whatever you want to call it, and they dry it for winter use. So nowadays they also freeze it. So there's an image of an artist's image of traditional fishing and a contemporary photograph of salmon dip net fishing. Salmon processing is a big deal. It's a family event, largely driven by women. So here's some Eric Carlson drawings of men and women in the process of moving salmon, preparing salmon, a model of salmon preparation. And this is kind of what it looks like. This is called swan. This is dried salmon, wind-dried salmon. It's very, very hot in July and August in the Fraser Canyon. Not only is it the best fishery, it's also the hottest place in interior BC. Temperatures are often in the well above 100 Fahrenheit, sometimes 110, 115. And so in covered drying racks, they wind dry the salmon, and if you like salmon, it's really good. But this is raw salmon just wind dried. And then in traditional times, it would have been either been stored in above ground structures or in underground structures. I'll talk more about storage here in a minute. But salmon wasn't the only thing. They're used in the winter villages. They're processed and used deer, roots. You'll notice the dog. Dogs to the Statlium were a food item, also a tool for a variety of uses. So a diet that was dominated then by salmon, by deer, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, and then a variety of berries and geophytes, root taxa. The storage system is really creative and interesting. They had a system of food storage that included storage in the procurement camps, so in fish camps and hunting camps, etc., above ground and below ground storage. That was intended to be long-term storage. There's also outdoor storage in the main villages, big pits, meter and a half deep, meter across, lined with bark, layers of pine, and dried fish, dried roots, dried deer, etc. And then also, as depicted here, indoors, there are also storage pits that were used for short-term storage. So you can imagine moving food from the field context to the village context, to the village context to the house context, and then stored short-term in the village, in the house before actually consuming. A lot of the cooking was done with boiling stones. These are watertight baskets, and cooking the rocks there used to boil this water to reconstitute the dried food. Lots of tools exhibited here, nets, spears, etc. Social complexity. The Statlium were in many ways not unlike other groups out on the northwest coast in terms of social relations. They had a system of inherited chiefly statuses. They had a system of achieved chiefly statuses. They had a commoner class as well. So you could be born into a commoner class or a chiefly class, but you still had to work to maintain, rise into a chiefly status out of the commoner status, or work as a chiefly member of society to maintain that position by bravery, but particularly by generosity. Another implication is that in these society, they were also cross-cut by clans. And so the highest position of a chiefly status family would be one member would be a chief of not just a house, but perhaps a village. And there was also multi-village chiefs, or what we call local group chiefs. And so this is actually an incredibly complex society with hierarchies and heterarchies cross-cutting each other in these large villages and across this landscape. So a long-standing question is sort of how did this thing, where did this come from? How did it develop? Ethnographers were, James Tate wrote wonderful ethnographies in the 1890s and early 1900s. But there was a bias towards coastal culture. And so Tate wrote that the Statliam must have borrowed their complex culture from the coast. And he even speculated that the South Coast people must have borrowed their complex culture from the more glorious North Coast. And one of the questions that we've had is, was that really true? Did this pattern of sort of structure of social life extend much farther back than the early ethnographers speculated to that effect? Okay. Recent Statliam history. We'll get into the archaeology in a little bit, but the fur trade started in the early 19th century with Simon Fraser's run down the Fraser River, 1808-ish. The Statliam were living in pit house villages. By the 1850s, CE, they were still in pit house villages, but they had lost a lot of people. There was a major smallpox epidemic in the 1780s. The Statliam persisted. At Bridge River, the site Keynote I'm going to talk about, the only evidence we have is one house that persisted into the mid-19th century, and that didn't even last very long. The gold rush hit in 1858, smallpox hit again in the mid-1860s, and by the late 1870s, people were being cordoned off into reserves, and by the 1880s, the Bridge River Band were visibly present materially, not in pit house villages, but in log house cabins. But they've persisted, they've survived. The Bear Clan or Xwísten today has 400 members, give or take. They have probably the biggest reserve in the Statliam group. They have a reputation for being the most difficult and strongest, most powerful negotiators with the province, and they have a reputation for being forward-thinking and coming up with innovative ways to employ and develop economic resources in the community. Okay. I did my PhD at Simon Fraser University. Part of my dissertation was working with Brian Hayden at a different nearby site called Keatley Creek. And I took UM teams to the Keatley site in 1999 to 2002. And when we were doing that, we were partnered with Xwísten, one of the other bands, and that was a great relationship. And after conversations with Xwísten and looking at some of the results we had, we realized we really needed to move from that site to a different site. And we had set up a meeting with Xwísten, with Chief and Council. And one of the things that became really obvious really quick was that Xwísten had been looking to start an archaeology project. They actually had been seeing the Keatley project underway for a while and some of the benefits that it brought to Xwísten. And so when I offered the chance to do an archaeology project at Xwísten or Bridge River, they said, yeah, we're interested in that. And so we developed an approach that's continued to evolve over the last 23 years to how we do archaeology. We wanted to start with indigenous research questions and then think about how the archaeology could benefit the larger community. So the big sort of overarching thing was antiquity. What was the history? What was the history of the Xwísten and the Statliam people? Because with the smallpox epidemics, with the Indian school era, there's been tremendous loss of life and loss of knowledge. And one of the big things they wanted me to work on was long-term history. So that was one of our sort of driving our major questions here. But then also, they wanted us to work with the band to develop opportunities for band members. Educational opportunities, economic opportunities. So we'll get there with that. Okay. So how do we conduct research? First of all, we don't do work unless there is joint interest in a research question. Most of our research questions were initiated by Xwísten. The big question they've had is, what is our history? Long-term history, we know what happened in the last 150 years, but what happened 1,000, 2,000 years ago? When did the villages begin? How did families cope with climate change, social change, etc. What was it like? There's a whole lot of questions they wanted answers to. I said, we can do that with scientific methodology, with modern archaeology. And so we developed, as I'll walk us through, a variety of approaches to addressing long-term questions about long-term history with archaeology. But all of our interpretation of the past in the land of Xwísten, or in Xwísten, has been structured by indigenous frames of reference. What do the elders say about these traditions? What do the ethnographies say about these traditions? How does that help us get insight into what we're seeing in the archaeological record? So we start with indigenous questions. We do contemporary state-of-the-art archaeology, and we try to understand what we're seeing using Statlium and Xwísten frames of reference. Okay, so the big set of questions. Village antiquity. What was the history of the Mid-Fraser villages? The Mid-Fraser is famous for its large villages. Villages of anywhere from 35 to 80 to even 100, over 100 houses. Houses that are big, bigger than this room. Maybe 40, 50 people living in a single house at their heyday of highest population. Where did the villages come from? What was the history of the villages? What about their technologies? How did those, how were those used to facilitate their way of life, facilitate their economies, and where did the technologies develop in situ? Did they borrow from other areas via trade and networks? We took a look at that. And finally, the complex social life of the Statlian people. How did that develop? Was it always that way? Did it come and go? Was there fluctuation, et cetera? A lot of questions to ask there. And then, how did families cope with change? Today, families having to cope with change. We're dealing with climate change, ongoing political challenges, and families today have to cope, but they have this incredible history of families adapting and coping with change as well. So that was a big question we had. And then finally, one of the questions they really wanted us to work on was how did communities interact with one another? And of course, for archaeology, it's the hardest question possible to get to how did these guys interact with these guys. So we've kind of got a model what I'll talk about. Okay. So a quick look at project history. We began in 2003. Our first goal was to just map the Kachauapnaz Bridge River site. This is it. This is our grid system. These are pit houses and external pit features, mostly ovens. And then what we did was, I'll show you in a coming slide a close-up of this. But we did geophysics. We did a lot of small tests. We did a lot of radiocarbon dating and built a model of what the whole village sort of looked like over time. Came back in 07 to 09 with this is supported by National Science Foundation. Another NSF grant here. We chose select houses and did a little more extensive geophysics and a little more extensive test excavations to look in more detail at inter-house relationship during what we call the Bridge River 2 and Bridge River 3 periods. And then during the process of both the earliest and the middle stage of research here, we discovered one house called Housepit 54 that had this really extraordinary record. I recall in 2004, I had this really big field school student. He was like 6'4", and he'd been assigned to do the little test unit into Housepit 54. And I looked over one day, and he had his feet sticking up in the air. He was down in this little hole, and he couldn't get to the bottom of it. And we realized this house was not the biggest house, but it had this incredibly deep, long record. And so when we did the testing in 08, 09, we realized it had this really extraordinary stratigraphic sequence. We thought maybe a dozen house floors. It turned to be a lot more than that. And so we had a conversation with the band, with chief and council, and said, given what you've seen, given what we've learned so far, would we be interested in really taking a deep dive into the experiences of families on an intergenerational basis? And they said, yeah, we like that. Let's go for it. So we got grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, grants from NSF, and we did the Housepit 54 project, which we've just finished, though the lab work is still ongoing. And then we've got a new project I'll talk about at the end of the talk here today. So, in trying to answer questions, population history, demographic history, starts with mapping the village. So this is a blow-up of the original village map showing house pits, grids, squares. These are 20-meter squares. These are pretty, you can see these are pretty big houses. And then this is a our first magnetometer map. So this is a magnetic signal. The red zones here are redeposited burned roofs. So they show up as strong positive magnetic signals. The red spots are generally ovens and hearths. And the blue spots are just patches of floor where there's dense numbers of storage pits. And so you can see houses real easily, the main kitchen areas, cooking areas all across the village. And this lines up really well with the surface map of the houses. And then what we did was, see the little black dots? These are our initial test units. We tested 67 houses. We radiocarbon dated 55 of them, some with multi-floor sequences, and built our first model of growth of the village. One of the really exciting things we realized that when you look at a site this complicated and this big, you have no idea how the layout of the houses were arranged, whether they were random or structured. And when we did the initial radiocarbon dating, we ran 80 radiocarbon dates, we realized that possibly we had the beginnings of something in Bridge River 1. We're just working on that now. We didn't follow up on it until just this year. But Bridge River 2, circa 1,300 to 1,600 years ago, we have what we think is probably a double ring of houses. There's a big outer ring, and then possibly an inner ring and a plaza. We have a break in occupation between Bridge River 2 and Bridge River 3. Only 3 houses crossed this transition, Bridge River 2 to Bridge River 3. House 54 is one of them. And in Bridge River 3, population boomed, and they established 2 what we call neighborhoods of rings or arc-shaped groups of houses. And then the famous Mid-Fraser, they like to use the word collapse, I think is a reorganization. At about 1,100 to 1,000 years ago, people sort of ceased their investment in aggregated living. They stayed in the area, we're pretty sure of that, but they dispersed on the landscape. And this times with the medieval warm period and probably pretty shaky salmon resources. And you can see that in our various attempts to model population. This is based upon what are called some probability distributions of radiocarbon dates. And without getting into the math, you can see this is the Mid-Fraser model showing the major Bridge River periods and the boom in Bridge River 3, and then the fallout, and then the fluctuations right just before European contact. Then this is a different way to look at it, using a complicated mathematical model based upon densities of fire-cracked rock in houses. But you can, so this is kind of a close-up of that, using a different way to try to get at actually how many people. That just shows you the ups and downs of the population. This actually tries to estimate numbers of people. So if we take a real close-up look, one model brings peak population to just under 400 people. Okay. And we've also matched up the population history against various paleoclimate and ecology measures. So this is data from Effingham Inlet, showing a variety of different data sets: fish scales, fish remains, diatoms, and you can see this peak right here in fish remains and diatoms. This is a period of marine productivity. That peak is that. That's a boom in fisheries, and it's a boom in human population, illustrating the close tie between the strength of the fishery and human population structure. Okay, so let's move on. We've also worked on technology. The technological traditions there are incredibly rich, from the projectile point systems to the other aspects of stone tool technology, bone technology. This is a digging stick. These are beads. This came from Housepit 54 from I think 2E. Anyway, it's a frog image on a soapstone fishhook shape. And sorry about this. One thing we've been doing is both trying to look at micro scale and macro scale in technological history. This is the macro scale. This is the Middle Upper Paleolithic in Siberia. This is Clovis, Western Stem, Northwest Coast, and what's unfortunately named Archaic. But one of the really neat things about this is it shows that there are real clear continent-wide technological traditions in terms of stone tool production. And one of the really interesting things is the plateau, the Fraser-Columbia Plateau villages, from a lithic technology standpoint, don't fall under the Northwest Coast model, they fall under the Archaic model. And it suggests that broad networks spanning the interior Pacific Northwest to the Rockies and east of the Rockies were operating, and ideas and materials were being shared across that as well as across the Pacific side. Other things were coming from the Pacific side: fishing traditions, some bone traditions, some aspects of housing traditions, but not all. So we're beginning to really appreciate looking at long-term traditions here.
There's someone in the waiting room.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Okay. One of our interests obviously was in this sort of question of sociality. How did social relationships change over time? A big focus of our 07, 08, 09 field seasons was looking closely at Bridge River 2 and Bridge River 3 and seeing if there was any major differences. Clearly, there was a change in the organization of houses from a single plaza and a single double ring of houses to two plazas, two sets of rings or arcs of houses. We learned that in Bridge River 2, 1300 to 1600, salmon dominated the economy, no surprise. From the standpoint of deer hunting and deer processing, it looks like hunting locally was pretty good. The whole carcasses were entering into the houses, being processed, often not processed as intensely as they could have been. It meant that game was pretty prevalent, salmon was pretty good, and when we compared artifacts and food production between houses, it looked like there was not much different. Even if there were major house size differences, the household economies, trade economies, subsistence economies were about the same. But then with the breakdown of Bridge River 2 and the rise of Bridge River 3, this is this declining, short-lived decline in population, then this boom in population, this reconfiguration of the village, a lot of things changed. Salmon continued to be dominant, but there began to be signs that some years salmon wasn't as good and wasn't as productive. We found that high-intensity artiodactyl processing, in other words, in some houses, to some degree in all houses, but particularly in certain houses, we're seeing just a limb signature coming in. In other words, indicators of long-distance hunting. Elders tell us that when things weren't good, people had to travel many, many kilometers away to hunt, and then they processed it in the field, just bringing the meat, the hide, and some of the better bones back for further processing. And that's what we see in Bridge River 3. And then we see, of course, the two neighborhoods, and then finally, we see indicators of the first signs of wealth differentials between houses. House 24 had more non-local raw materials than any other house in the village at any time. It had more gewgaws, it had more jewelry, and more pendants, more jade, more obsidian, more of any measure of wealth was in that house. It also had a whole different system of scraper manufacture. They have a really unique slate stone technology in the Bridge River Valley. It isn't like anywhere else. Most houses typically would make rectangular to square, chipped slate hide scrapers. House 24, they're making sawed triangular hide scrapers. You ever try sawing stone with other pieces of stone? It takes a long time. This is a major investment in illustrating the ability to do that. And then finally, we saw evidence of feasting. There were two pits full of dog remains that clearly had been ritually killed and partially consumed. There was also another pit with 2,500 cranial fragments from fish, suggesting a rare occasion of fish head soup making. And the indigenous people today see this. If you're lucky and they really like you, and it's a celebration day, you get fed fish head soup. And I think that was going on back then too. And so we have feasting, we have long distance trade, we have status markers in this one house, whereas in this little house 16 that we looked at, if the deer is crushed all to pieces, there's almost no trade goods, there's no dog remains, and it suggests that other houses were not as equal as that house was. And so we have some indicators, coarse grain, that during the boom and then the fall off leading to abandonment, that we had some inequality developing. Inequality is in line with expectations of contemporary activities. If you look at contemporary Xwísten society today, there are still families that own the better fish rocks, that are more likely to get elected to band leadership. And this is the same kind of thing that James Tate wrote about in the 19th century, where he described this system of hereditary and achieved statuses and family negotiations within and between villages. So we think maybe something like that was developing there in the Bridge Over 3 period. Okay, finally, the big question of how do they interact between villages? This is a million-dollar question. It's a hard one. You can start to look at trade, you can start to look at things like that. So based upon the structure of the villages, based upon the way raw materials or lithic raw materials are moving between villages, we built a sort of a two-way model. We suggested that during Bridge Over 2, when we could see just a single plaza, double ring of houses, what if that was the sign of a single clan controlling that village and its local group? And what if the same thing was going on in associated with other major villages? So at the Keatley site, for example, over here, or this Xwísten site here, or the Bell site over here. And then when Bridge Over 3 came along, it got even more complicated with the dual neighborhoods that you can see at Bridge, or Kachuknes, and at Keatley and elsewhere, where there's lots and lots of arrangements of houses. What if you got clans that cross-cut other clans, such that a single village could have more than one clan present with negotiated differential access to resources as discussed in ethnographies? I ran this past a number of elders, and they really liked this model. It seemed to fit how they imagined ancient social relationships, where you both had hierarchy in the sense of ranked houses and ranked households within houses, and yet you also had hierarchy in the sense of counterbalanced, overlapping clan groups. Xwísten is Bear Clan, though they trace their ancestry to Frog Clan. They'll all tell you that, oh, we were once upon Frog Clan. And Frog Clan was based down here in the traditional Lillooet village. Okay. We've got to take a deeper dive into all of this with the Housepit 54 project. Let me show you some of what that looked like. This is the Housepit 54 grid. 4 blocks, about 4 by 4 meters each, though we didn't excavate the full 4 by 4 in each one of them. This is an image of the work. This is a community project where we had both UN students and, as we've always done, community members participating in the excavation there. It was nice having the big excavation for an educational standpoint. Every few days we had the school groups out. We had open house routinely for the whole community. Anyone could participate in the work. It was really fun to be surrounded by kids. The kids are also excited. And one of the reasons the band wanted this was this gets the kids excited about their past. It gets the kids excited about traditions. It gets the kids excited about their language. And so this would enhance language teaching in the schools and in the community by getting the kids worked up about the fact that these villages were ancient and that we could understand them materially with this kind of work. This is the idealized sequence of Housepit 54. It is the most remarkable context, showing long-term life in these individual houses. We had 17 floors. The white zones are floors. Imagine a situation where people dug the original house, put put it from a modern perspective. Put a carpet down, lived on the carpet for a generation, did all your tool work, all your sleeping, all your cooking, everything. And then when the superstructure to the roof got a little nasty, the floor got a little nasty, whatever, you decide, okay, we're gonna start over. You pull the roof, put a new carpet down, put a new roof up. And they did this routinely over and over and over again. But instead of a carpet, of course, it was a layer of silty clay. But just enough to cover the old stuff and then start again. And it accumulated this remarkable record. We also have some roofs in between periodically. And then, and so that's the fur trade way up there at the top. And then we, at 2A1, actually 2A1 we don't know much about because the fur trade folks dug out most of 2A1. But on 2A, that's about 1,100 years ago. And this takes us back in about roughly 25-year increments back to about nearly 14, maybe just over 1450 years ago.
How much longer, Anna? How much longer? Your talk.
Oh, am I done? Am I out of time?
Well, you're 10 minutes into the question.
Oh.
Q&A.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll go quick. All right. So, dating, house floors, detailed mapping, artifacts, more phylogenetics. We reconstructed the occupational sequence with artifacts and with spatial arrangements of features. Inequality peaks, and I want to talk briefly about heritage tourism. We trained the first round of tour guides. We work closely with the tour guides. This is Sandra teaching about salmon processing. They teach us about that part. Higher ed opportunities. We've got 2 Statlium members enrolled at UM. One's an undergrad, Josh Jack, and one's a PhD student, Alicia Edwards. And we continue to work closely with Xwísten on all these things. And we have a new project. We have a $12 million project with the European Union looking at global foraging and population and indigenous history. And we're working on community efforts, including funded community members traveling around the world, meeting with the group to think about not just Xwísten archaeology, but Mesolithic in Scandinavia and Japanese archaeology as well. Thank you. Sorry.
I have a really quick question.
Yeah.
With 17 floors, how mounded is it getting? What kind of mound do you get out of that?
It's complicated. The original house was not much bigger than me to you.
Screen sharing.
Cool sound show. Okay. Over time, imagine multiple houses, everybody dumping old roofs and old hearth materials out on the rims around the houses. And so that the surface of the site continues to rise as people then add more floors to the original excavation of the house. And then sometimes the house would expand, dig into the midden material that had accumulated around it. It went from a 4x4 meter house to about a 4 or 5 by 8 or 10 meter house to a 13 meter circle house. So the histories are really complicated. It's almost like a Middle Eastern tell. It's up to 3 meters of cultural deposits in places.
So it does rise?
The whole thing rises, yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
So, so maybe it's a silly question, but so many Native people believe that we never migrated, we always were here,
Yeah.
and archaeology exists to justify colonization, right? And so what do you think about this? Like, because I had this conversation with the Russians and Native Americans, and they would always say, like, you came to this place too. We are not the only one who came to colonize you.
Yeah.
You colonized this area too.
Right.
So what do you think?
That's a really good question. In our work with Xwísten, it's been very clear that the archaeology has been able to demonstrate continuity over the last 2,000 years. Looking deeper, we can demonstrate continuity in the artifact styles back probably 5,000 to 6,000 years. And if you include the coastal data, we can take it back to 10,000 to 12,000 years. That's a long time. I don't debate peopling of the Americas with anybody, but I think archaeology can be a force for establishing history. One of the things that we worked on, the slideshow up anymore, with Housepit 54 is to address this question of instability of forager settlement. There's been a trope that's floated around in plateau archaeology that plateau peoples were never sedentary. They were always moving, they never had a single place to live.
Yeah.
And we addressed this directly with the Bridge River Project because we could look at the history of accumulation of the houses. Then even in Housepit 54, we asked, okay, if this was people just randomly coming willy-nilly to the site, you would have a random rearrangement of floor, of how people lived on the floors at Housepit 54. Instead, we have a steady, gradual change over time, suggesting a single lineage group occupying that thing for 350 years. So we can use archaeology to address that problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question, but also at 11:45 is a time when you can bring new questions to the table or more questions to the table, and I built that into the schedule. So
I think somebody was downstairs.
Yeah, I want to ask one.
Yeah.
How big were the villages? And I want to ask you, why didn't the villages, what was the reason, I don't know if you looked into that, why didn't the villages extend to cities? What was the reason that they maintained villages? Because you mentioned villages.
Right, right. At peak size,
Uh-huh.
at 1,200–1,300 years ago, all the villages combined, we estimate, may have had as many as 8,000 people in a 20-kilometer stretch of river. This was a period of peak fisheries and peak sort of hunting and geophyte resources. So I think there was probably a subsistence ceiling on how many people could develop, because when things got choppy, people dispersed. They stayed in the area because when we look at the 300-year-old stuff compared to 1,100-year-old artifacts, exactly the same. It's the same people. But they fluctuated in terms of whether they stayed aggregated or more dispersed. And that was a lesson to be taught in how you survive climate change. One of the things we've been thinking a lot about.
all right, let's take a break.